The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled under the crystal chandeliers as Queen Elizabeth prepared for one of the most important state dinners of her reign. The President of France was visiting, and everything had to be perfect. The royal staff had spent weeks planning every detail, from the golden cutlery arrangement to the precise timing of each course. As the Queen made her entrance in her stunning emerald gown, she felt confident and regal. The cameras were rolling for the official documentary, and millions would later watch this moment of British elegance. She gracefully descended the marble staircase, her crown glittering magnificently. But as she reached the final step, disaster struck in the most unexpected way. Her Majesty's heel caught in the hem of her dress, causing her to stumble forward with surprising speed. The royal protocol officer, standing nearby with a silver tray of champagne glasses, tried to steady her, but ended up losing his balance too. In a domino effect that would later be replayed thousands of times on social media, the tray went flying, sending crystal glasses crashing across the polished floor. The French president, who had been waiting to greet her with a formal bow, found himself dodging flying champagne glasses like he was in an action movie. One glass landed perfectly in the ornate flower arrangement, creating an accidental centerpiece that actually looked quite artistic. Another glass somehow managed to land upright on a nearby table, still containing champagne, as if nothing had happened. But the most memorable moment came when the Queen, trying to regain her composure, stepped backward directly onto the train of her own dress. This caused her to perform what onlookers later described as an involuntary curtsy that lasted much longer than protocol required. The French president, not knowing whether to help or maintain diplomatic distance, froze in his half-completed bow, creating a scene that looked like a bizarre dance routine. The royal corgis, who had been waiting patiently in the corner, decided this was the perfect moment to investigate the commotion. They bounded across the ballroom, slipping and sliding on the wet floor like furry ice skaters. One particularly adventurous corgi managed to slide all the way across the room and gently bump into the president's leg, looking up at him with innocent eyes as if to say hello. Palace security guards trained for serious threats, but not for flying glassware and sliding dogs, stood frozen in confusion. They weren't sure if this qualified as a security breach or just an unusually entertaining evening. Meanwhile, the orchestra in the corner continued playing their welcoming waltz, apparently deciding that stopping would make things even more awkward. The Queen, displaying the legendary British stiff upper lip, simply smiled and announced to the room that she was demonstrating a new royal greeting she had invented especially for French dignitaries. The president, charmed by her quick thinking, played along perfectly, suggesting that perhaps they should patent this new diplomatic dance. As the staff rushed to clean up the mess, more chaos ensued. A butler slipped on the wet floor and accidentally knocked into a marble statue, which wobbled precariously before being caught by a quick-thinking footman. The statue was of Queen Victoria, and for a moment it looked like one queen was about to topple another, creating what historians would later call a symbolic passing of crown. The dinner photographer, who had been capturing every moment for posterity, found himself with the most entertaining royal photo collection in history. His pictures showed the Queen in various stages of graceful recovery, the president's expressions ranging from shock to amusement, and the corgis looking like they were auditioning for a comedy show. When the chaos finally settled, the Queen and the French president were both laughing so hard that tears were streaming down their faces. The formal state dinner had turned into the most relaxed and genuine diplomatic meeting either had ever experienced. They spent the rest of the evening sharing stories of their own embarrassing moments, completely abandoning the prepared speeches and formal protocol. The incident became known as the Great Champagne Catastrophe of 1995, and rather than being embarrassed by it, the Queen decided to embrace the humor. She later commissioned a special champagne glass to be made that was designed to be unbreakable and gave one to every visiting dignitary as a memento, along with the story of that unforgettable evening. The French president returned home with not only a strengthened diplomatic relationship, but also the best dinner party story of his political career. He would often tell friends about the night he learned that even queens are human, and that sometimes the most memorable moments are the ones that go completely wrong. Years later, when asked about the incident in interviews, Queen Elizabeth would simply smile and say that it taught her an important lesson about the difference between being perfect and being perfectly human. The evening proved that sometimes the best diplomacy happens not when everything goes according to plan, but when everyone involved can laugh together at life's unexpected surprises. The royal staff still talk about that night as one of their favorite memories working at the palace. It reminded everyone that beneath all the ceremony and protocol, the royal family are real people who sometimes trip, laugh, and create wonderful memories out of complete disasters. The Great Champagne Catastrophe became a beloved palace legend, proving that even the most formal occasions can become the most fun when approached with humor and grace. Prince Charles had always prided himself on being an environmentally conscious royal, so when he decided to visit an organic farm in the countryside, he thought it would be a perfect opportunity to connect with nature and promote sustainable agriculture. The press was invited to document this important royal engagement, and Charles felt confident about showcasing his knowledge of farming and environmental issues. The day started beautifully with clear skies and gentle sunshine. Prince Charles arrived at the farm wearing his best country gentleman outfit, complete with a perfectly pressed tweed jacket, polished leather shoes, and his favorite walking stick. The farmer, a jolly man named Tom who had been working the land for 40 years, greeted the prince with enthusiasm and pride in his organic operation. The planned tour began with a visit to the vegetable gardens, where Charles was meant to plant some seeds to symbolize growth and renewal. The photographers gathered around as the prince knelt down in what he thought was soft, dry soil. However, what looked like solid ground was actually a recently watered bed of very sticky mud that had been disguised by a thin layer of dry soil on top. As Charles pressed down with his hands to plant the seeds, he began to sink slowly into the mud. At first, it seemed manageable, but as he tried to stand up, his hands slipped, and he found himself in an increasingly awkward position. His expensive leather shoes were now completely buried, and his tweed jacket was collecting mud at an alarming rate. The photographers, initially thinking this was a planned rustic photo opportunity, continued snapping pictures with enthusiasm. The farmer, Tom, realized what was happening and rushed over to help, but in his eagerness to assist royalty, he slipped on the muddy edge and landed bottom first right next to the prince, splashing mud in all directions. What happened next turned the dignified royal visit into something resembling a comedy sketch. As both men tried to help each other stand up, they kept slipping back down into the mud. Prince Charles, maintaining his sense of humor despite the situation, started laughing uncontrollably, which only made it harder for him to get proper footing. Tom, mortified at first, began laughing too when he realized the prince was genuinely enjoying the absurdity of the situation. The royal protection officers, trained for serious security threats, but not for mud rescue operations, stood at the edge of the garden looking helplessly at their muddy charge. They couldn't decide whether to risk their own dignity by joining the mud wrestling match or maintain professional distance while their principal wallowed in organic soil. The situation became even more entertaining when the farm animals decided to investigate the commotion. A curious pig named Penelope, who was supposed to be safely contained in her pen, had somehow escaped and came trotting over to see what all the fuss was about. She seemed delighted to find humans finally joining her in her favorite activity of rolling in the mud. Penelope began enthusiastically rooting around near the prince, occasionally nudging him with her snout in what appeared to be encouragement. Charles, now completely covered in mud from head to toe, found himself having a genuine conversation with the pig about the benefits of organic farming, much to the delight of the assembled photographers who were capturing every muddy moment. The farmer's wife, Margaret, came running from the farmhouse with towels and Wellington boots, but she was laughing so hard at the sight of her husband and the future king of England sitting in the mud with a pig that she could barely walk straight. She later admitted it was the funniest thing she had seen in her 60 years of life. When Prince Charles finally managed to stand up, with the help of several farm workers and a strategically placed rope, he looked nothing like the dignified royal who had arrived an hour earlier. His hair was sticking up in muddy spikes, his tweed jacket was completely brown instead of its original green, and his shoes were somewhere buried in the organic soil, probably growing into next season's crop. But instead of being embarrassed or cutting the visit short, Charles embraced the situation completely. He asked Tom to give him a proper tour of the farm, mud and all. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking around in Wellington boots, with Charles learning about composting, sustainable farming practices, and the proper way to avoid mud traps. The photographs from that day became some of the most beloved royal images ever published. They showed Prince Charles as a real person who could laugh at himself, get dirty, and still maintain his genuine interest in the important work being done on the farm. The image of him sitting in the mud, laughing with Tom while Penelope the pig looked on, became an iconic representation of down-to-earth royalty. Tom and Margaret kept the muddy royal handprint as a permanent feature of their garden, and they often tell visitors the story of the day the prince came to their farm and ended up looking like one of their vegetables. Charles sent them a thank you note along with a personally signed photograph of himself covered in their organic mud, which they treasured more than any formal royal portrait. The incident also led to some practical changes in royal visit protocols. Future farm visits now include weather briefings, soil condition reports, and mandatory Wellington boots for all participants. But more importantly, it reminded everyone that some of the best royal moments happen when the carefully planned events go wonderfully wrong. Years later, whenever Prince Charles speaks about sustainable farming and connecting with the land, he often references his muddy adventure at Tom's farm. He learned that day that you can't really understand farming until you've literally been grounded by it, and that sometimes the most authentic experiences come from the most unexpected situations. The muddy royal visit became a favorite story among farmers throughout the country, proving that their future king wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty in the service of understanding their work. It showed that royalty doesn't always have to be pristine and perfect to be respected and loved by the people they serve. Princess Diana had always been known for her natural grace and elegance, but even the most graceful people can have moments that remind everyone they're beautifully human. It was during a charity fashion show at the Royal Albert Hall that Diana experienced what would become one of the most endearing royal mishaps in modern history. The event was organized to raise funds for children's hospitals, and Diana had agreed to walk the runway alongside professional models to showcase designs from upcoming British fashion designers. She had been practicing her catwalk walk for weeks with a professional model coach, feeling confident and excited about supporting both charity and British fashion in such a unique way. The evening began perfectly with Diana looking absolutely stunning in a flowing midnight blue gown that sparkled under the stage lights. The audience, filled with celebrities, fashion industry professionals, and charity supporters, was completely captivated by her presence. She had already successfully completed 2 outfit changes and received thunderous applause for each appearance. For her final appearance, Diana was wearing a dramatic white evening gown with a particularly long train that flowed behind her like something from a fairy tale. The dress was a masterpiece of British design, featuring intricate beadwork and a flowing silhouette that caught the light beautifully as she moved. She felt like a princess from a storybook as she prepared for her grand finale walk. As Diana began her final stride down the runway, she felt confident and radiant. The crowd was cheering, cameras were flashing, and everything seemed perfect. However, what she didn't realize was that one of the models from the previous segment had accidentally dropped a small sequin from her dress, which was now lying innocently on the runway, like a tiny, shimmering booby trap. Halfway down the catwalk, Diana's heel landed directly on the sequin, which acted like a miniature roller skate. Her foot slid forward unexpectedly, and she began what appeared to be an elegant lunge that went on much longer than anyone expected. The long train of her dress, which had been flowing gracefully behind her, suddenly became wrapped around her legs as she tried to regain her balance. What happened next was like watching a beautiful swan trying to untangle itself from invisible fishing line. Diana, determined not to fall completely, began a series of increasingly dramatic poses as she attempted to steady herself. Her arms went out for balance, creating shapes that looked almost like interpretive dance moves, while her face maintained a serene smile that suggested this was all part of a planned performance. The audience, initially concerned, quickly realized that Diana was handling the situation with such grace and humor that they began applauding her improvised recovery routine. One fashion critic later wrote that he had never seen anyone turn a potential disaster into such an entertaining performance. Diana somehow managed to make stumbling look like a new form of artistic expression. The most memorable moment came when Diana, still tangled in her dress train, decided to embrace the situation completely. Instead of trying to fight the fabric, she gathered it up in her arms like she was picking flowers and performed what looked like a spontaneous curtsy to the audience. The crowd erupted in delighted laughter and even louder applause than she had received for her previous flawless walks. A quick-thinking model who had been watching from backstage decided to join Diana on the runway, pretending that this was all part of a planned finale. She began helping Diana untangle her train while maintaining the pretense that they were performing some kind of elaborate fashion presentation about the versatility of evening wear. The two women ended up laughing so hard that they had to hold onto each other for support. The photographers, who had initially been concerned about capturing unflattering images of the princess, found themselves documenting one of the most charming and human royal moments ever recorded. The pictures showed Diana laughing genuinely, her eyes sparkling with mirth as she dealt with her fashion emergency with remarkable good humor and grace under pressure. Even the usually serious royal protection officers couldn't help smiling as they watched their charge turn a potential embarrassment into a triumph of personality over protocol. They later admitted it was one of their favorite memories of protecting the princess, seeing her natural warmth and humor shine through what could have been a mortifying experience. The fashion designer whose dress had caused the tangle was initially horrified, but Diana personally reassured him that the dress was beautiful and that sometimes the most memorable fashion moments are the unexpected ones. She even suggested that he should design a special adventure dress for future charity events, complete with a detachable train for emergency situations. The charity benefited tremendously from the evening, not just from the funds raised, but from the enormous media coverage that Diana's charming mishap generated. The story of her graceful stumble was covered by newspapers around the world, bringing attention to the children's hospital charity that might never have received such widespread publicity through conventional means. Diana kept the white dress and would often tell the story at future charity events, demonstrating how she had gotten tangled up and making audiences laugh with her animated reenactment. She said the experience taught her that sometimes the most important thing wasn't looking perfect, but showing people that you could handle imperfection with grace and humor. The incident became a favorite among royal fashion historians, who pointed to it as an example of how Diana's natural charisma and warmth could turn any situation into a positive experience. The photos from that night showed not a flawless princess, but a real, relatable woman who could laugh at herself and share that joy with others. Years later, fashion students would study the incident as an example of how personal authenticity could triumph over technical perfection. Diana's stumble became more memorable and beloved than any of her flawless runway walks, proving that sometimes the most beautiful moments are the ones that remind us of our shared humanity. The Royal Albert Hall kept a photo from that evening in their permanent collection, showing Diana mid-stumble with a radiant smile, surrounded by swirling white fabric and sparkling sequins. It captured perfectly the spirit of a woman who could find joy and beauty even in the most unexpected circumstances, and who shared that gift generously with everyone around her. Prince William had always been the more serious and composed of the two princes, known for his diplomatic skills and natural leadership qualities. However, during a state visit to Australia, he discovered that even the most well-prepared royal can be completely outsmarted by local wildlife and the unpredictable nature of live television. The visit was part of an important diplomatic mission to strengthen ties between Britain and Australia. William was scheduled to participate in a live television interview at a beautiful outdoor location near Sydney, with a stunning harbor and opera house providing a picturesque backdrop. The interview was meant to showcase the strong relationship between the two nations and highlight various charitable initiatives. Everything was perfectly arranged for the broadcast. The camera crew had tested all angles, the lighting was ideal, and William looked impeccable in his navy suit and crisp white shirt. The interviewer, a respected Australian journalist named Sarah, was known for her professional approach and had prepared thoughtful questions about conservation efforts, youth programs, and the future of the Commonwealth. As they began the live interview, William felt confident and relaxed. He was speaking eloquently about marine conservation projects when he noticed something moving in his peripheral vision. At first, he thought it might be a camera operator adjusting equipment, but as the movement got closer, he realized it was something much more uniquely Australian. A large, curious kangaroo had somehow wandered onto the filming location, apparently attracted by all the activity and possibly hoping for food. The animal was magnificent, standing nearly as tall as William himself, with powerful legs and alert eyes that seemed to be studying the strange gathering of humans with great interest. The camera crew, following professional protocol, kept filming as if nothing unusual was happening. The interviewer, Sarah, noticed William's distracted expression, but couldn't see what was behind her. She continued asking questions while William tried to maintain his composure and answer intelligently, all while keeping one eye on the approaching marsupial. The kangaroo, displaying typical Australian confidence, decided that the interview setup looked like an interesting place to investigate. It began hopping closer, its powerful tail thumping on the ground with each movement. William, having never encountered a wild kangaroo before, wasn't entirely sure what protocol applied to the situation. Royal training had covered many scenarios, but what to do when interrupted by large Australian wildlife had somehow been omitted from the curriculum. As William was explaining the importance of protecting marine ecosystems, the kangaroo finally reached the interview area and, with remarkable timing, positioned itself directly behind the interviewer. From William's perspective, it looked like Sarah had suddenly sprouted large, twitching ears and was leaning forward in a very unusual way. The sight was so unexpectedly amusing that William began to struggle with maintaining his serious demeanor. His voice started to waver slightly as he tried to focus on his environmental conservation talking points, while simultaneously watching a kangaroo apparently eavesdropping on their conversation. The animal seemed genuinely interested in the discussion, tilting its head at just the right moments. Sarah, still unaware of her furry co-host, noticed that William seemed to be fighting back laughter, but assumed he was just being charming and relaxed for the Australian audience. She pressed on with her questions, unknowingly creating an increasingly surreal situation as the kangaroo began to mirror some of her gestures, nodding along as if it understood the conversation. The situation became even more entertaining when the kangaroo decided to participate more actively in the interview. It began making soft, grunting sounds that seemed to coincide with pauses in the conversation, as if it was trying to contribute its own thoughts on conservation policy. William, now struggling desperately to maintain his royal composure, had to bite his lip to keep from bursting into laughter. The tipping point came when Sarah leaned forward to ask a particularly serious question about climate change, and the kangaroo simultaneously leaned forward in exactly the same way, creating a perfect mirror image that William could see, but Sarah could not. The sight of the distinguished journalist unknowingly synchronized with a curious kangaroo was more than even royal training could prepare someone to handle. William finally lost the battle with his composure and began laughing so hard that he couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down his face as he pointed behind Sarah, who finally turned around to discover her unexpected interview partner. Her reaction was priceless. A moment of complete shock followed by delighted laughter as she realized what had been happening. The kangaroo, apparently pleased with the positive reaction it had generated, decided this was the perfect moment for its grand finale. It stood up to its full height and began what appeared to be a victory dance, bouncing up and down while making triumphant grunting sounds. The sight of a celebrating kangaroo proved too much for everyone involved, and the entire production crew erupted in laughter. Rather than stopping the interview, Sarah made a brilliant decision to embrace the unexpected guest. She began asking William questions about wildlife conservation while the kangaroo continued its performance in the background. The result was one of the most entertaining and memorable royal interviews ever broadcast, combining serious environmental discussion with genuinely joyful moments of natural comedy. William later said that the kangaroo interview taught him more about Australia in 15 minutes than all his briefing papers combined. The experience showed him the Australian spirit of rolling with unexpected situations and finding joy in life surprises. The footage became viral around the world, with people praising both William's good humor and Australia's unique ability to provide unforgettable experiences. The interview was so successful that the Australian Tourism Board later used clips from it in their promotional materials, billing the country as the place where even royal interviews become adventures. The kangaroo became an unofficial ambassador for Australian wildlife, proving that sometimes the best diplomacy happens when everyone involved can share a good laugh. The production team later learned that the kangaroo was a regular visitor to the area, known locally for its curiosity about human activities. They named it William in honor of the prince, and it became something of a celebrity in its own right. Visitors to the area would often ask to see Prince William's kangaroo, and the local wildlife rangers would point out the famous marsupial with pride. Years later, whenever William visits Australia, people still bring up the kangaroo interview with fondness and laughter. It became a perfect symbol of the warm relationship between Britain and Australia, sometimes formal and serious, but always ready to embrace the unexpected with good humor and mutual respect. Prince Harry had always been known as the playful, spontaneous member of the royal family, but even he couldn't have predicted the chain of events that would unfold during what was supposed to be a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony at a new children's hospital in London. The event was meant to be a straightforward royal engagement, but it became a legendary example of how quickly things can go wonderfully wrong. The morning started beautifully with Prince Harry arriving at the hospital in high spirits, genuinely excited to meet the young patients and officially open the new pediatric wing. He was wearing his dress military uniform, complete with ceremonial sword and various medals that caught the morning sunlight perfectly. The hospital staff had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and everything was arranged to perfection. The ceremony was set to take place in the hospital's new garden courtyard, where a large red ribbon had been stretched across the entrance to the children's wing. Local dignitaries, hospital staff, patients' families, and media representatives had gathered to witness this important milestone. Children from the hospital were seated in the front row, many of them in wheelchairs or connected to mobile medical equipment, all excited to meet a real prince. As Harry approached the ribbon with the ceremonial golden scissors, he noticed that many of the children seemed more interested in something behind him than in the ribbon cutting itself. He turned around to see what had captured their attention and discovered that a small group of therapy animals from the hospital's pet program had escaped from their designated area and were now exploring the courtyard. The therapy team included 2 golden retriever puppies, a particularly adventurous rabbit named Patches, and a small pony called Butterscotch who was supposed to be safely contained in the nearby garden area. The animals had apparently decided that the ceremony looked much more interesting than their usual routine and had come to investigate the festivities. Harry, always good with both children and animals, decided to incorporate the unexpected guests into the ceremony rather than having them removed. He knelt down to greet the puppies, who immediately began competing for his attention with enthusiastic tail wagging and face licking. The children in the audience were delighted, and their laughter filled the courtyard with genuine joy. However, as Harry stood up to return to the ribbon cutting, his ceremonial sword somehow became tangled in the long ribbon that one of the golden retrievers had decided to investigate. The puppy, thinking this was a wonderful new game, began pulling on the ribbon while Harry tried to gently extract his sword without cutting anything prematurely. The situation became even more complicated when Patches the rabbit, apparently feeling left out of the attention, decided to hop directly onto the ceremonial platform. In her enthusiasm to join the party, she knocked over the small table that held the official plaque for the ceremony, sending it clattering across the stone courtyard with a sound that startled everyone, including the pony. Butterscotch the pony, who had been peacefully grazing nearby, was so surprised by the noise that she bolted toward the ceremony area at a speed that seemed impossible for such a small animal. The sight of a miniature pony galloping toward the ribbon-cutting ceremony, while a prince wrestled with ribbon-tangled puppies and dodged a bouncing rabbit, created a scene that no royal protocol manual had ever contemplated. Harry, demonstrating the quick thinking that had served him well in military service, made a split-second decision to embrace the chaos completely. Instead of trying to restore order, he began narrating the events like a sports commentator, describing the great animal Olympics that was taking place at the hospital opening ceremony. The children were absolutely thrilled by this unexpected turn of events. They began cheering for their favorite animals, as if watching the most exciting sporting event of their lives. Harry played along perfectly, awarding imaginary medals to each animal for different categories like Best Ribbon Wrestling for the Golden Retrievers and Most Dramatic Entrance for Butterscotch the Pony. When the hospital's head veterinarian finally arrived to collect the escaped therapy animals, Harry had an inspiration. He suggested that instead of a traditional ribbon cutting, they should have the animals help with the opening ceremony. After all, they were an important part of the hospital's healing mission and had already stolen the show. What followed was probably the most unconventional royal ceremony in modern history. Harry held the scissors while the golden retriever puppies each grabbed a piece of the ribbon in their mouths. Patches the rabbit was placed gently on Harry's shoulder, where she appeared to be supervising the entire operation. Butterscotch the pony was positioned next to Harry, occasionally nudging the ribbon with her nose as if offering helpful suggestions. The actual ribbon cutting became a team effort involving one prince, two puppies, one rabbit, one pony, and an audience of delighted children who had forgotten all about their medical treatments and were simply enjoying the most entertaining royal visit in hospital history. The photographers captured every moment of the organized chaos, creating images that would become treasured memories for everyone involved. The ceremony concluded with Harry giving an impromptu speech about how the therapy animals had taught him that sometimes the best healing happens when we embrace unexpected joy and find reasons to laugh together. He thanked his co-hosts for reminding him that formal ceremonies are much more fun when they include surprise guests who don't know they're supposed to follow protocol. The hospital staff later said that the children talked about Prince Harry's animal ceremony for months afterward. Many of them credited the joyful memory with helping them through difficult treatments, proving that sometimes the most therapeutic moments are the completely unplanned ones. Harry arranged for the therapy animal program to receive a special royal endorsement, and he became a regular supporter of animal-assisted healing programs at hospitals throughout the country. He often joked that his royal education had never included courses in ceremony management with escaped farm animals, but that it should definitely be added to the curriculum. The golden scissors from the ceremony were later displayed in the hospital's main lobby, along with photos from the animal-assisted ribbon cutting. Visitors would often ask to hear the story of the day when a simple ceremony became an unforgettable celebration of healing, laughter, and the magic that happens when protocol takes a back seat to pure, spontaneous joy. Years later, whenever Harry visited other hospitals or children's charities, he would often bring up the Great Animal Olympic ceremony as an example of how the best royal moments happen when everyone involved, princes, patients, puppies, and ponies alike can simply enjoy being together and celebrating life's wonderful unpredictability.